"These dogs are uncontrollable," the handler said, his voice a raw nerve frayed by hours of failure. The sound, sharp with frustration, cut through the cacophony of barking, yelping, and the frantic scrabbling of claws on concrete. Rick Jennings, young, credentialed, and holding a master's degree in animal behavior from a prestigious university, slammed his hand against the chain-link fence of the main run. The vibration sent a shockwave of renewed agitation through the pack of 8 shepherds in Malinois, turning the already chaotic enclosure into a vortex of canine anxiety. It's like they're wired wrong, all of them. There's no focus, no drive, just pure, unadulterated chaos. Command School's going to pull the plug on this whole rescue to readiness project if we can't get a handle on them by Friday. From the far end of the kennels, where she was meticulously scrubbing a feeding trough with a stiff bristled brush, Sergeant Eva Rostova heard his outburst. She didn't look up. She had heard variations of the same speech every day for the past 3 weeks, each one pitched a little higher with desperation. She respected Jennings's education, his passion, but he was trying to train these dogs from a textbook. He saw them as a bundle of programmable responses, a series of inputs and outputs that should logically yield a disciplined K9. He didn't see the individual histories flickering behind their eyes, the abandonment, the neglect, the failed placements that had landed them here on this last-chance military outpost. They weren't blank slates. They were shattered pieces of porcelain he was trying to glue back together with rigid commands and zero patience. The disinfectant fumes stung her nostrils, a smell she normally associated with order and cleanliness. But today it just smelled like a futile attempt to sterilize a problem that wasn't about hygiene. It was about spirit. She rinsed the trough, the cold water splashing against her camouflage trousers. It was then, as she straightened up, wiping her wet hands on her thighs, that she saw him. An old man, standing by the public viewing fence that separated the main compound from the dusty access road. He was a civilian, that much was obvious. He wore faded denim overalls over a flannel shirt, the kind of attire that spoke of decades of hard work, not fashion. A worn-out baseball cap, its logo bleached into illegibility by the sun, sat low on his brow. He wasn't looking at the handlers or the state-of-the-art training facility. His entire being was focused on the dogs in the main run. He was perfectly still, a stark contrast to Jennings, who paced and gestured like a frustrated orchestra conductor whose musicians had all gone deaf. The old man's posture was what caught Rostova's eye first. It was straight, but not stiff. It was a posture of profound equilibrium, rooted to the spot, his weight settled evenly on worn leather boots caked with dry mud. He looked like a farmer, and a sign on his beat-up pickup truck parked nearby advertised, "Calder's Farm, fresh produce and hay." He was probably here to pick up the old blankets the base donated to local farms for animal bedding. He was just a bystander, yet he watched with an intensity that felt professional. Rostova watched him watch the dogs. His head was tilted slightly, his eyes, shadowed by the brim of his cap, moving with an unnerving economy. He wasn't just looking at the pack, he was dissecting it. He tracked the dominant Malinois, a sable-coated male named Aries, who was the ringleader of the chaos. Then his gaze shifted to a smaller German shepherd, Juno, who was exhibiting signs of extreme stress chewing on the fence ties. He noted the way a third dog, a Dutch shepherd named Pax, was using the chaos as cover to bully a younger, more submissive dog. He saw the entire invisible architecture of their dysfunction in a way that Jennings, with all his charts and methodologies, clearly missed. Jennings saw 8 uncontrollable dogs. The old man, Rostova sensed, saw a story, a social structure, a language he understood. He remained there for a solid 10 minutes, a silent, weathered statue of observation, as Jennings tried another failed exercise involving brightly colored focus toys, which only served to incite a brief but vicious squabble over a red rubber ball. The handler's shoulders slumped in defeat. He kicked at a loose piece of gravel and turned to walk back to the office, his face a mask of bitter resignation. He was done for the day. He was admitting defeat, and it was in that precise moment of surrendered silence, when the handler had given up, that the old farmer finally moved. He didn't move much. He simply took one step closer to the fence, resting his hands on the top rail. The skin on his knuckles was a roadmap of scars and calluses, the hands of a man who had worked with soil and rope and tools his entire life. But they rested on the fence with a strange gentleness, a lack of tension that seemed to flow down his arms and into his very stance. He wasn't there to interfere. Rostova got the distinct impression he was simply paying his respects to the animals, a final quiet acknowledgement before he went about his business. He watched the dogs for another long moment, letting the echoes of Jennings's angry energy dissipate from the air. The dogs were still panting, pacing, their nerves raw and exposed. Aries was standing on his hind legs, paws against the fence, barking at the departing handler's back. The old man's eyes locked onto Aries. He didn't try to outshout the dog. He didn't make a move to intimidate him. He just waited, patient as a mountain. He waited until Aries paused for a fraction of a second to draw a breath. And in that tiny, almost imperceptible window of quiet, the old farmer pursed his lips. He didn't shout. He didn't yell. He whistled. Just once. It wasn't a simple whistle, not the kind you'd use to call a pet across a yard. This was something else entirely. It was a sound that seemed to be made of multiple tones at once, a sharp, cutting note that demanded attention, followed by a softer, rolling undertone that offered something else. An inquiry, perhaps, a question. It was complex, structured, and it sliced through the humid afternoon air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It wasn't loud, but it had a quality of resonance that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of the kennel. For a split second, nothing happened. And then, everything did. The effect was so sudden, so total, that Rostova actually flinched, thinking she'd missed something, some other sound or signal. But there was nothing else. Only the echo of that single, impossible whistle. Aries, the big Malinois who had been a whirlwind of fury just a moment before, froze mid-bark. His body went rigid, his head snapping around to locate the source of the sound. His ears, which had been flattened back in aggression, swiveled forward, twitching, analyzing. The bark died in his throat, replaced by a low, questioning whine. The change in the alpha was the signal. Like a current passing through water, the stillness spread through the pack. One by one, the other 7 dogs fell silent. The frantic pacing stopped. The fence chewing ceased. The low-level growling that had become the kennel's background music simply vanished. Within 5 seconds, the entire run, which had been a bedlam of noise and motion, was plunged into a silence so profound it was deafening. 8 dogs, all washouts deemed too aggressive, too fearful, or too stubborn to train, stood utterly still. Their heads were all turned in the same direction. Their bodies were all oriented towards the same point. They were all looking at the old farmer in the faded overalls. Their attention was not just captured, it was given. Freely. Wholly. It was a display of focus Jennings had been trying to achieve for weeks with treats, tools, and threats, and this stranger had accomplished it with a single puff of air. Rick Jennings, who had been halfway to the office, had stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around slowly, his face a canvas of disbelief. He looked at the silent, attentive dogs, then at the old man, then back at the dogs. He blinked as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. Rostova felt a shiver trace its way up her spine. It wasn't fear, it was awe. She had spent 6 years in the Army, 2 of them working with K-9 units. She had seen some of the best handlers in the world work their magic. She'd seen dogs perform incredible feats of obedience and courage, but she had never, ever seen anything like this. This wasn't training, this was communication. The old man, Jacob Calder, didn't seem to notice the 2 stunned military personnel staring at him. His focus remained entirely on the dogs. He kept his hands resting lightly on the fence. He offered a slow, deliberate blink, a canine signal of non-aggression. Then he made another sound. It was a soft, low click, a sound made with his tongue against the roof of his mouth. In response, Aries took a step back from the fence and sat down. His tail gave a single, tentative thump against the concrete. As soon as their leader sat, 2 other dogs followed suit. Calder clicked his tongue again, a slightly different rhythm this time. Juno, the anxious fence chewer, visibly relaxed her posture and lay down, placing her head on her paws, though her eyes never left his face. He wasn't issuing commands, he was having a conversation. Jennings finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "What?" What did you just do? Calder turned his head slowly, his gaze finally leaving the dogs to meet the young handlers. His eyes were a pale, clear blue, startling in his sun-weathered face. They were calm, patient eyes, and they held no judgment, only a quiet, deep-seated knowing. "They're not uncontrollable," the farmer said, his voice as soft and raspy as dry leaves. "They're just shouting." And nobody was listening to what they were saying. He turned his attention back to the run. He made a low humming sound in the back of his throat. Pax, the bully who had remained standing, finally lowered himself into a submissive crouch. "You were trying to be the loudest voice in the room," Calder continued, speaking as much to the dogs as to the humans. "But a leader doesn't have to shout. He just has to be the one worth listening to." He pushed himself off the fence and gave a small nod, as if his work was done. "I'm just here for the blankets." He started to turn towards his truck, but Jennings moved quickly, his academic arrogance completely shattered and replaced by a desperate, raw curiosity. "Wait, please. Who are you?" Calder paused, his back still mostly to them. "Name's Jacob Calder. I run the farm down the road." "No, I mean, that whistle, the way they listened. I've never seen anything like it. I have a degree in this stuff. I've studied associative learning, operant conditioning, pack dynamics. None of it explains this." Jacob turned back fully, a flicker of something, not quite a smile, more like a sad understanding, in his eyes. "You studied the theories, son, that's good. But these dogs, they don't live in a textbook. They live right here." He gestured with a calloused thumb towards his own chest. "In the heart. And here." He tapped his temple. "In the gut. You're projecting your frustration. They feel it. It's like poison in the water. You're tense, so they're tense. You're shouting, so they're shouting back. You think you're leading them, but all you're doing is getting into a screaming match. And trust me, a stressed-out Malinois can always scream louder than you." Rostova found herself stepping forward, her own curiosity overriding her sense of military protocol. "Sergeant Rostova, sir," she said, her voice unexpectedly formal. "With respect, Mr. Calder, that was more than just being calm. That whistle, I've never heard a sound like it." Jacob's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, he seemed to truly see her. He looked at her posture, the way she stood, the quiet competence in her eyes. He saw a fellow professional, albeit from a different generation. "It's an old signal," he said, his voice dropping into a more confidential tone. "It's for establishing orientation. It's not a command to come or sit. It's a question. It asks, where is the center? And it also provides the answer, I am." He looked back at the dogs, who were now all lying down, a silent tableau of canine tranquility. A pack needs a center, a calm, predictable point to orient themselves around. Without it, they create their own, and it's usually chaotic. That big fella, he nodded towards Aries. He was trying his best to be the center, but he's too young, too full of fear and fire. He was making a mess of it. All I did was offer him a better option. Jennings was running a hand through his already messy hair, his mind visibly struggling to process what he was seeing and hearing. But how? I mean, the frequency, the tone. Was it a specific hertz? Is it something I can replicate with a device? Jacob let out a soft, dry chuckle. "It's not in a device, son. It's in the diaphragm. It's about intent. You have to mean it. The dog knows. They can hear a lie in your heartbeat from 50 yards away. They know you don't believe in them. So why should they believe in you?" The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Jennings paled slightly, the truth of the accusation hitting home. He didn't believe in them. He saw them as damaged goods, a problem to be solved, a potential failure on his record. He didn't see the immense potential locked inside each one of them. Can you show me?" Jennings asked, his voice barely audible. The question hung in the air, a complete surrender of his ego. Jacob studied the young man for a long moment. He saw the stripped-down honesty in his eyes, the desperation to learn. He wasn't just trying to save his career, he was trying to understand a truth that had just dismantled his entire worldview. "The dogs are the ones who will show you," Jacob said. "But I can translate." He gave a nod to Rostova. "Sergeant, would you mind opening the run? And maybe bring me a standard 6-foot leash. No choke chains, no prong collars, Just a simple lead. Rostova didn't hesitate. She didn't look to Jennings for confirmation. In that moment, the chain of command had unofficially but undeniably shifted. She retrieved a worn leather leash from the supply shed and walked to the gate of the main run. As she unlatched it, the dogs didn't surge forward as they usually would. They stayed put, their eyes flicking between her and the old man, waiting for permission, for the signal that would tell them what to do next. The air of the kennel was transformed. The desperation was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of anticipation, of hope. The lesson was about to begin. Jacob Calder walked through the gate with a slow, deliberate gait. He didn't carry a bag of treats or a protective sleeve. He carried nothing but the leash Rostova had given him and an aura of absolute calm. The 8 dogs, which had sent Jennings into a retreat minutes earlier, remained lying down. They watched him, a mix of curiosity and deep-seated respect in their eyes. Aries, the powerful Malinois, lifted his head, a low rumble starting in his chest, not of aggression, but of uncertainty. He was the leader, and a new, more powerful presence had just entered his domain. Jacob didn't walk towards Aries. Instead, he walked a slow, calm circle around the perimeter of the run, his boots scuffing softly on the concrete. He didn't make eye contact with any of the dogs. He was ignoring them, but it was a specific, intentional kind of ignoring. He was communicating through his body language that he was not a threat, that he was not there to challenge them, but that he was also completely in control of the space. He was a rock in the middle of a stream, letting the water flow around him. After one full circuit, he stopped. He turned his body sideways to Aries, another non-confrontational signal, and slowly sank into a low crouch, bringing himself down to the dog's level. He still didn't look the Malinois in the eye. He looked at the ground a few feet in front of the dog. He breathed out, a long, slow, audible sigh. It was the sound of contentment, of peace. Aries, who had been tense, mirrored the action. The dog let out a sigh of its own, its body visibly deflating as some of the tension bled away. Jennings and Rostova watched, mesmerized from outside the fence. "What you have to understand," Jacob said, his voice calm and low, never breaking his focus on the space in front of the dog, "is that a dog like this, a Malinois bred for police or military work, is a high-performance engine. You can't just jam the key in and stomp on the gas. You have to warm it up. You have to know the fuel it needs. And it doesn't run on fear. It runs on trust." He extended his hand, palm down, and held it still in the air. He didn't push it towards the dog. He offered it, an invitation without demand. "Ari's here," he said. "He washed out of his last program for handler aggression. That's what the file says, I'd bet." Jennings nodded, dumbfounded. "That's right. He bit his handler during an apprehension exercise." "Of course he did," Jacob said softly. "The handler likely pushed him too hard, too fast, made it a fight. A dog like this wants to work with you, not for you. There's a difference. He needs a partner, not a boss." When he felt his partner was being unpredictable or unfair, he told him so in the only way he knew how. He didn't bite out of malice. He bit out of confusion. He was telling the man, "You are not leading. You are just pushing." After a long moment, Aries stretched his neck forward and gently sniffed Jacob's offered hand. He licked it once, a quick testing flick of his tongue. Jacob didn't move. He didn't try to pet the dog. He just let the contact happen. "Good boy," he whispered. The praise was so soft it was barely audible, but Ari's ears twitched. He'd heard it. Slowly, Jacob brought his hand back. He then reached into the pocket of his overalls and pulled out, not a treat, but a small, frayed piece of rope, no bigger than his palm. He held it out. Aries looked at the rope, then back at Jacob's face. The dog was thinking, processing. "The mistake people make," Jacob explained, his voice a quiet lecture, "is thinking obedience is the goal. It's not. Obedience is a byproduct. The goal is communication. The goal is a shared understanding of the mission. Right now, our mission is very simple. It's for him to understand that I am not a source of stress, and for me to understand what he needs to feel secure." He tossed the small piece of rope onto the ground between them. Aries looked at it, then back at him. The dog didn't move. "He's waiting," Jacob said. "For permission? For a command? Jennings asked from the fence line. No, Jacob replied. He's waiting to see what I'm going to do. His last handler probably would have shouted, "Fetch!" or tried to force the toy on him. He's expecting pressure. He's expecting the game to be a contest. Jacob did nothing. He just waited, perfectly still. After almost a full minute of silence, Aries cautiously nudged the rope with his nose. Jacob gave a soft, encouraging click with his tongue. Aries nudged it again, then picked it up gently in his mouth. He didn't try to run with it or shake it. He held it, then took a step forward and offered it back to Jacob. Jennings gasped. That's a retrieve to hand. We've been trying to get him to do that for a month. He just wants to play tug of war. Because you've been making it a fight, Jacob said, finally taking the rope. He didn't pull on it. He simply accepted it. Thank you. Good work. He then offered the rope back. Aries took it. Jacob put the lightest pressure on it, and the moment Aries resisted, Jacob let go. There. You see? He pulls, I yield. I am not his opponent. The game isn't me versus you. The game is us and the rope. I'm teaching him that cooperation is more rewarding than conflict. He repeated the exercise 3 more times. Each time, Aries' movements became looser, more confident. A soft, playful light began to dawn in the dog's intelligent eyes. The hard edge of anxiety was melting away, replaced by the pure joy of engagement. The other dogs watched the interaction, their bodies relaxed. The entire emotional temperature of the kennel had dropped by 20 degrees. The air was no longer thick with tension. It was filled with a quiet, focused learning. Rostova watched Jacob's hands. They were weathered and scarred, but his movements were fluid and precise. The way he handled the leash, the way he offered the rope, the subtle shifts in his body weight. It was all part of a language she was beginning to recognize. Her grandfather, who had been a dog handler in Vietnam, had old photos in a dusty album, photos of him with his German shepherd, Saber. In those photos, he held the leash the same way, with that same relaxed confidence. He had talked about his trainer, a legendary figure from a special program who could speak dog better than he could speak English. A man who trained the handlers as much as the dogs, teaching them about respect and intuition, not just dominance and commands. She remembered a phrase her grandfather used to repeat, "You don't command the dog, you command the space around the dog." She was watching that philosophy in action. "Mr. Calder," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet lesson. "Did you ever serve?" Jacob paused, his hand resting on Aries' head. The dog, who had flinched from human touch before, leaned into his palm. Jacob didn't look at Rostova, but a shadow of a memory passed over his face. "A long time ago," he said, his voice distant, "I was in a different line of work." "The K9 units in MACVSOG, Rostova said, more a statement than a question. "The handlers there, they had a reputation. They worked differently. They used a specific 4-tone whistle to command search patterns in the jungle without making a sound." Jacob finally looked up at her, and his pale blue eyes held a universe of unspoken history. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't have to. The slight, weary nod he gave her was answer enough. He was one of them. A ghost from a forgotten chapter of military history. A time when the bond between man and dog was forged in the deadliest environments on Earth, where a shared language that transcended species was the only thing that kept you alive. The handlers from that program were legends, pioneers who wrote the book on Special Operations K9 handling, not in a classroom, but in the mud and the rain, with the enemy sometimes only feet away. "The whistle was just to get their attention," he said quietly, turning his gaze back to Aries. "The real work is this, the quiet part, the part where you build a country of 2, where you are the only 2 citizens, and you trust each other more than you trust the ground you're walking on." Jennings looked like he had been struck by lightning. MACVSOG. He'd read about them in a historical annex of a training manual, a brief, almost mythical mention of their unconventional methods and the unparalleled success of their dog teams. The program was shut down decades ago, its techniques deemed unorthodox and unscalable by the modern military bureaucracy. The official doctrine had moved towards more standardized, easily repeatable training regimens, the very textbooks he had spent years mastering. He was trying to apply a mass production model to a custom-built machine. He was looking at a living piece of that history, a man who had not just read the book, but but had written the original unedited chapters with his own blood, sweat, and devotion. "All my training," Jennings said, his voice hollow with the weight of his revelation. "It's all been about control, about mitigating the dog's instincts. You're doing the opposite. You're embracing them. You're using them." "The dog's instincts are the greatest tool you have," Jacob corrected gently. "They can smell a lie on a man's breath. They can hear a change in barometric pressure. They can sense a tripwire before a machine can. My job wasn't to make my dog, Storm, into a robot. It was to learn his language well enough that he could tell me everything the jungle was saying. I wasn't his master. I was his interpreter." He finally stood up, moving with a fluid grace that belied his age. Aries stood with him, not because he was commanded to, but because he chose to. The dog now stood by Jacob's left side, his shoulder almost touching the man's leg, in a perfect, unprompted heel position. He looked up at the old farmer with an expression of pure, unconditional adoration. The alpha had found his center. Jacob reached down and attached the leash to Ari's collar. "The problem," he said, coiling the leash loosely in his hand, "is that you've been trying to fix 8 different problems at once, but you don't have 8 problems. You have 1. He looked around at the other 7 dogs who were all watching him intently. "You have a pack without a trustworthy leader. Give them that, and the other problems start to fix themselves. They don't need a drill sergeant. They need a shepherd." He began to walk towards the gate, and Aries trotted calmly beside him, the leash hanging loose between them. There was no tension, no pulling. It was a partnership. As they passed the other dogs, none of them stirred. They watched their leader follow his new guide with a calm acceptance. The pack was no longer in chaos. It had found its order. He stopped at the gate, handing the leash to a still speechless Jennings. Aries whined softly as Jacob's presence retreated. "You try now," Jacob said. "Don't pull, don't command, just walk, breathe, be the calm center. Invite him to join you in that calm. He'll do it. He wants to." Jennings took the leash, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Aries, not as a problem to be solved, but as the partner Jacob had described. He took a deep, calming breath, held the leash loosely, and began to walk. After a moment's hesitation, Aries followed, matching his pace. It wasn't perfect, but it was a world away from the frantic pulling and fighting of before. It was a start, a real start. Jacob watched them for a moment, a flicker of approval in his eyes. He then turned to Rostova. "That grandfather of yours," he said. "He was a good man. I think I remember him. Tell him Storm and I said hello." He gave her a final nod, then walked through the gate and headed towards his old pickup truck, his duty done. Jennings and Rostova stood in silence, watching him go. The dogs in the run were quiet, settled. The air itself felt different, lighter. The frantic, desperate energy had been replaced by a profound sense of peace and possibility. The uncontrollable dogs were resting, waiting for a leader they could finally trust. Jennings looked down at the powerful dog standing calmly by his side, then back at the retreating figure of the old farmer. His entire education, his career, his understanding of his chosen field, had been turned upside down in the space of 30 minutes by a man in dusty overalls and a profound understanding of the truth. "Sergeant," Jennings said, his voice thick with humility, "we need to stop him." Rostova was already moving. "Sir, I don't think he's the kind of man who wants to be stopped." "I'm not trying to stop him," Jennings replied, a new and unfamiliar determination in his voice. "I'm trying to hire him, or beg him, whatever it takes. My education is finished. I need to start learning." They caught up to him just as he was about to open the door to his truck. "Mr. Calder," Jennings began, I don't know what to say. Thank you isn't enough. What you did in there, it was..." He trailed off, unable to find the words. Jacob just nodded, his hand on the door handle. "The dogs did the work. I just changed the music." "Please," Jennings pressed, "I know it's a lot to ask. You have your farm. But could you come back? Maybe just an hour a day, as a consultant. We can pay you, whatever you want." Jacob looked from Jennings's earnest, pleading face to Rostova's quietly hopeful one. He looked back at the kennel, where 8 dogs were resting peacefully for the first time in weeks. He saw 8 lives filled with potential, 8 spirits that had been on the verge of being extinguished, now with a flicker of a chance. He thought of Storm, his partner, his other half, lost to the jungle so many years ago. He thought of the promise he had made to him in those final moments, that he would always honor the spirit of the dog, the sacred trust between their species. "I don't need your money, son," Jacob said, his voice gentle. "But the dogs, they need a fair chance. I'll be here tomorrow morning. 6 a.m. sharp. We'll start with the basics." He paused, looking Jennings directly in the eye. "And the first lesson is for you, not the dogs. It's about how to listen." Without another word, he got into his truck, the old engine turning over with a familiar rumble. As he pulled away, leaving a small cloud of dust in his wake, Jennings and Rostova stood watching, 2 students at the beginning of a new and profound education, delivered by a quiet farmer who spoke a language older and truer than words. The kennels were silent, but for the first time they felt full of promise.